Hey there, and welcome to another deep dive.
Hey everyone.
Today we're plunging into the story of a figure who feels, well, so familiar, so iconic, you might think there's nothing left to discover.
Right.
But trust us, when you actually look closer, the layers are incredible.
Absolutely. We're exploring Heracles, known to many, of course, as Hercules, arguably the most famous Greek hero. But he's someone far more complex, contradictory, and just downright surprising than the simple tales of strength might suggest.
That's right. We've gone deep into a pretty comprehensive source on Heracles, pulling from, well, a wealth of information to really unpack the myth, the widespread cult, his multifaceted character, and his truly global legacy.
Yeah, our mission in this deep dive is really to dig out the most important nuggets of knowledge, those aha moments that challenge the common perception.
Right.
And give you a shortcut, essentially,
Right.
to understanding what made Heracles such a dominant and enduring figure across ancient cultures, history, and even, into the modern world.
Okay, let's unpack this complex legend then.
Let's do it.
At his core, who is this larger-than-life figure, the sources tell us he was born Alcaeus, or Alcides, the result of the chief god, Zeus, having an affair with a mortal woman named Alcmene.
Right. And her actual husband, Amphitryon, he became his foster father. So already it's complicated.
Mm-hmm. And it's significant, isn't it, that he's a descendant and even a half-brother of Perseus, another major hero.
Oh, absolutely. He's consistently presented as the greatest of the Greek heroes, the one many powerful royal clans, like the Heraclidae, trace their ancestry back to.
A claim to fame, for sure.
Definitely. And he was the ultimate champion against these frightening, monstrous forces from the earth, these chthonic monsters.
That lineage and his role as a monster slayer are just foundational. And of course, his fame crossed borders. Most of you listening probably know him by his Roman name, Hercules.
Yeah, and this adoption was so complete that Roman emperors, figures like Commodus and Maximian, explicitly identified with him.
Yeah.
His cult was adapted there, took on Roman details. And what's particularly fascinating is how his story just grew and absorbed influences over time. The sources note that while, many popular tales circulated, later Alexandrian poets specifically worked to elevate and, refine his mythology.
Sort of polish it up.
Exactly. And looking further back, his figure clearly drew on much older motifs from the Near East, like that ancient imagery of a hero wrestling a lion. You see that echoed.
But here's where it starts getting really interesting, hinting at his unique status.
Yeah.
While he's called the greatest hero, apparently no single tomb was ever definitively identified as his in Greece.
Exactly. And this fact points to his truly dual nature, which the sources acknowledge he wasn't just a hero, he was also seen as a god.
Hero and god.
Right. The poet Pindar even gives him the title Heros Theos, which literally means hero god. And this wasn't just like a theoretical thing.
How so?
Well, at the very same festivals, people would perform sacrifices to him first as a hero with a chthonic libation, poured onto the ground, acknowledging his connection to the earth and death. And then, moments later, they'd sacrifice to him as a god upon a raised altar, recognizing his divine status.
Wow, that's such a clear illustration of how the ancient Greeks navigated this ambiguity. He really embodies their closest approach to a demigod, doesn't he? But even they seem to wrestle with how to classify him entirely.
For sure. The sources touch on various origin theories for the myth itself, from connections to, like, Neolithic hunter cultures or maybe shamanistic practices, as Walter Burkert proposed, to the really intriguing possibility that the widespread myths could have been rooted in the actual deeds of one or maybe more historical figures whose stories just got mythologized over time.
So maybe a real person behind the legend.
Possibly. And you see this ancient grappling with his status even in classic texts like the Odyssey. Odysseus encounters his ghost. He's shade down in Hades, the realm of the dead.
Right, I remember that.
Yet the text also states that Heracles himself is up, feasting with the deathless gods on high. Ancient critics actually noticed this contradiction.
They did.
Yeah, and the sources mentioned that later verses were even interpolated, kind of added into the Odyssey later, to try and smooth over these conflicting representations. It just shows he wasn't a static, simple figure, even to those who first told his tales.
And that very ambiguity, that sense of him transcending his mortal limitations, That probably fueled the incredible prevalence of his worship, right? Why worship a hero? Because he became something more.
Exactly. His cult was absolutely everywhere. The sources mention the major festival called the Heraclea, which specifically commemorated his death and ascent to godhood, typically held in late July or early August.
And the geographical footprint of his worship is just astounding, isn't it?
It really is. There's evidence of a temple dedicated to him in the Bahariya Oasis in Egypt, dating way back to 21 BCE. There are historical links or suggestions of his presence in places like Malta.
Malta,
Yeah.
wow.
And countless ancient cities across the Mediterranean and beyond were named Heraclea after him. There's even a legend that a tiny island near Lemnos, called Neae, got its name because Heracles supposedly swam there.
He swam there. Seriously.
That's the story. And of course, the famous Roman city of Herculaneum in Italy was also said to have been founded by him.
And some cities took that dual nature so seriously, you said, they maintain entirely separate sanctuaries.
That's right. One for Heracles, worshipped as a god, and another for him as a hero.
That architectural detail, it speaks volumes about the conceptual distinction they made.
It really does. The sources suggest the persistence of his cult stemmed not just from his ascent to heaven, but also from his suffering, his pathia. This focus on his pain and struggles actually gave rise to unique rituals within his mysteries, involving periods of grief and mourning that then preceded moments of intense joy.
So his very human experience of suffering was integral to his worship, alongside his divine triumph. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and the sources also indicate his cult was flexible, capable of absorbing local cult figures, and he was constantly invoked as a powerful patron, particularly for men.
Right, the ideal figure for warfare and physical training.
Exactly. He presided over gymnasiums and the ephebes, the young men undergoing military preparation. Even royal houses, like the ruling dynasty of Macedonia, claimed descent from him, using his divine connection for, well, protection and legitimacy.
And the evidence for his popular worship goes way back.
Oh yeah, inscriptions from Phaleron show active cult practice in the 6th century BCE. And later, after the 4th century BCE, we see him identified with the major Phoenician god Melkart, showing that cultural absorption at a really high level.
It wasn't just grand temples, though. You mentioned local epithets.
Right, his integration into daily life is shown through these local names linked to very specific deeds, like the Oetaeans called him Cornopian, the locust warder, for helping them get rid of locusts.
Practical.
Very practical. In Erythrae, he was Ipoctonus, the vine grub killer, for destroying vine-eating insects. And there's that fascinating example near Bura in Achaea where he had a statue and an oracle in a cave. People would pray, throw 4 dice marked with characters, and the meaning was explained through artwork. He was known there as Baricus.
So these localized forms of worship really paint a picture of a figure deeply embedded in the everyday concerns of communities.
Totally. Moving beyond just the strong man image, his character as depicted in the myths is incredibly complex, full of contradictions that maybe made him relatable despite his divine power.
Absolutely. While strength is primary, the sources highlight his courage, his ingenuity, and his truly significant sexual prowess with both men and women, which we'll get into.
Ingenuity is key, though. He wasn't just brawn. He used his wits when brute force wasn't enough, like diverting rivers to clean the Augean stables.
Right, the famous one.
Defeating Antaeus by lifting him so he couldn't touch his Earth Mother for strength, or cleverly tricking Atlas into taking the sky back.
Smart moves. He was the patron of gymnasia and wrestling schools alongside Hermes, right? Solidifying that link to physical training.
Yep, and his look is instantly recognizable. The lion skin and the club. Can't miss it.
But here's a surprising detail mentioned in the sources. He was also regarded as a playful figure.
Yeah, apparently. He used games to relax after his labors and was sometimes depicted playing with children. He was broadly seen as a benefactor, someone who made the world safe for mankind by clearing it of monsters and dangerous forces.
That's the public hero image. But his private character, as shown in the myths, was driven by extreme passion and emotion. He was capable of incredible acts for his friends, like wrestling death itself to bring Alcestis back for her husband, Admetus.
An amazing story.
Or restoring Tyndareus to his throne.
Yet, that same passion could turn him into a terrifying enemy. He inflicted horrible vengeance on those who slighted him, like Augeas, Neleus, or Laomedon.
And Sophocles' play, the Trachiniae, even shows a cold, almost callous side, where he casually discusses having 2 women, including his wife Deianira, under the same roof.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And his actions weren't always purely his own choices, were they? Euripides' plays famously show his terrible deeds, like killing his family, being partly driven by forces outside his rational control, divine causation through Hera's madness.
Right. That raises profound questions about his character.
Yeah.
How responsible was he, really?
Exactly, and Seneca's tragedy Hercules Furens takes us further, linking the madness not just to divine intervention, but maybe to his own refusal of a simple life in favor of extravagant heroic violence. Suggesting his choices, his ambition, led to those hallucinatory visions that defined his tormented character. Deep stuff.
Wow. Okay, so his mythology is this vast tapestry, starting with a birth story as dramatic as any you'll find.
Oh yeah. Hera's relentless hatred of Heracles is absolute central to his entire life, and it stems directly from Zeus's affair with his mortal mother Alcmene.
And Zeus went to incredible lengths, didn't he? Making one night last 3 days, disguising himself perfectly as Alcmene's husband, Amphitryon.
He did. And the sources mention a truly fascinating biological detail here. Alcmene became pregnant with 2 sons from different fathers on the same night.
Wait, really?
Yes. Heracles by Zeus and Iphicles by Amphitryon. It's a phenomenon called heteropaternal superfecundation. Gives him a twin with a purely human father, highlighting his dual heritage right from birth.
Incredible. And Hera's revenge was swift and cruel.
Oh yeah. She tricked Zeus into swearing an oath that the child born that night from the house of Perseus would rule, knowing that Eurystheus, another descendant, was due around then.
Okay.
Then she used Eilithyia, the goddess of childbirth, to delay Heracles' birth and ensure Eurystheus was born prematurely, making him the High King.
Ouch. But her plan was foiled.
Sources say Alcmene's servant, Galanthus, tricked Eilithyia into releasing her magical hold by shouting that the baby was already born. A clever move.
But Alcmene still feared Hera's wrath.
Right. She initially exposed the infant Heracles. But Athena intervened, brought him to Hera, who was somehow tricked into nursing him out of pity.
Hera nursed him.
Briefly. Until he suckled with such divine strength, she pushed him away, and her milk sprayed across the sky, supposedly creating the Milky Way.
That's the origin of the Milky Way. Amazing.
That's the myth. Athena then returned him to Alcmene, where he was raised.
And he was originally named Alcides, or Alcaeus.
Right. He gained the name Heracles, which ironically means glory of Hera, probably later, maybe after his labors or when he became a god.
And his strength was obvious from the start.
Absolutely. At just 8 months old, he famously strangled 2 giant snakes sent by Hera, found playing with them like toys. The seer Tiresias saw this and prophesied his extraordinary monster-vanquishing future.
His youth also had flashes of that, temper?
Definitely. He killed his music tutor, Linus, with a lyre after being corrected or maybe even caned. Not great.
Right.
That led to him being sent away to tend cattle.
And during this time, there's that allegory, The Choice of Heracles.
Yeah, by Prodicus.
Okay.
Where he's presented with paths by figures embodying vice and virtue, and famously chooses the difficult, glorious life of heroism. The sources note this as part of a 5th century BCE effort to, well, ethicize his sometimes violent myths, make him more of a role model.
Okay. And later, he married Megara, the daughter of King Tryon of Thebes.
Which brings us, unfortunately, to the devastating event that triggered his most famous trials, the labors.
The madness.
Yes. In a fit of divine madness sent by Hera, Heracles killed his children. Some accounts tragically include Megara in this, others spare her. A horrific event.
And this act required purification.
Deep purification. Guided by the Oracle of Delphi, who was unknowingly still under Hera's influence, he was commanded to serve his cousin King Eurystheus for 10 years and perform whatever tasks Eurystheus set for him.
And success promised purification and ultimately godhood or immortality.
That was the deal. Though an alternative tradition suggests this promise of immortality after 12 labors was actually made by Zeus to Hera. And interestingly, the tragedian Euripides actually presents the madness after the labors in his play, which really shifts the narrative focus and the why.
And Eurystheus initially demanded 10 tasks, but 2 were disqualified.
That's right. Cleaning the Augean stables, because Heracles apparently asked for payment, which wasn't allowed. And killing the Lernaean Hydra, because his nephew Iolaus helped him. So Eurystheus, being difficult, added 2 more, bringing the total to the legendary 12 labors.
These labors took him across the known world and beyond, challenging every aspect of his strength and character. They are the foundation of so many stories.
Absolutely. And while we could spend hours on each, the source outlines the core challenges.
Like the Nemean Lion, defeated barehanded, whose hide he wore. That's iconic.
Totally. Then the multi-headed Lernaean Hydra, requiring cauterization with fire to prevent regrowth, helped by Iolaus. The year-long chase for the sacred golden hind of Artemis.
Must have been exhausting.
You'd think. Capturing the Erymanthian boar alive, not killing it. And that incredible feat of diverting two rivers, the Alpheos and Peneos, to clean the Augean stables in just one day.
Ingenious, really.
Then he had to confront monstrous creatures like the man-eating Stymphalian birds, scared off with Athena's help by using a rattle.
A rattle.
Special bronze rattle, yes. Then the powerful Cretan bull, father the Minotaur, apparently, which he carried back and released. And the terrifying human-eating mares of Diomedes.
Oh, right. He fed Diomedes to them. Grim.
Very grim. He also retrieved symbolic treasures, like the belt of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, overcoming Hera's opposition yet again.
She just never let up.
Never. And the cattle of the triple-bodied giant Geryon, guarded by a two-headed dog Orthrus. That journey required him borrowing Helios's golden cup, the sun barge, to cross the ocean.
Wow. His final two labors push boundaries, though.
For sure. Retrieving the sacred golden apples of the Hesperides, guarded by the dragon Ladon. This involved getting help from Nereus and Prometheus, and famously tricking Atlas into taking the sky back after Atlas got the apples for him.
The old switcheroo.
Exactly. And perhaps the most audacious, descending to the underworld itself to capture Cerberus, the three-headed guard dog, using no weapons. A feat so terrifying it apparently sent Eurystheus literally hiding in a big bronze jar.
Ah, can't blame him. But his life wasn't just these 12 tasks, right? The sources detail a staggering number of further adventures.
Oh yeah. Right after the labors, he gets entangled with Princess Ilo. Her father reneged on a promise after Heracles won an archery contest for her hand.
Dad move.
Very bad move. Heracles ended up killing the father and his sons, except for Iphitus, who was actually Heracles' friend and abducted Iola anyway.
But tragically, in yet another fit of madness, Heracles killed his friend Iphitus. Threw him over a city wall.
Yes, another terrible consequence of Hera's influence, or perhaps his own nature, and this murder required further penance.
Which led to the famous servitude to Queen Omphale in Lydia.
Exactly. Sources say he served for up to 3 years. It's a period often depicted humorously or ironically, where he was forced to do traditionally female tasks, like spinning wool and wear women's clothes, while Omphale wore his lion skin and carried his club. A real fascinating reversal of gender roles in his mythos.
Definitely stands out. During this time, he also encountered the mischievous Cercopes.
Little forest spirits who tried to steal his weapons. He caught them and famously tied them upside down to a stick he carried over his shoulder. They apparently made fun of his hairy backside.
Ah, okay. He even joined the famous quest of the Argonauts for a time.
He did. But he left the journey after his young companion, Hylas, a prince he'd taken under his wing, was abducted by water nymphs or drowned in Mysia while getting water. Heracles searched for him for so long, the Argo eventually sailed on without him. A sad story.
And sources like Hesiod and Aeschylus credit Heracles with freeing the Titan Prometheus.
Yes, by shooting the eagle that was eating his liver daily. A major act of heroism. And Prometheus, in turn, supposedly offered him valuable prophecies.
On his travels, the sources describe him battling giants in Liguria. And his prayer to Zeus on his knees there is said to be the origin of the constellation known as the Kneeler in Gonesin.
That's right. And before Homer's epic, Heracles famously sacked Troy. King Laomedon had promised him these divine horses for saving his daughter Hesione from a sea monster, but broke his word.
Another king making a bad promise to Heracles.
Seems to be a theme. Heracles returned later, destroyed the city, killed Laomedon and all his sons except Priam, the future king, during the Trojan War, establishing an earlier legendary conflict for the city.
And after the labors, some traditions say the gods instructed him to found a colony in Sardinia.
Yeah, installing the numerous sons he had apparently fathered with the 50 daughters of King Thespius as leaders, and sending his loyal companion Iolaus to assist them.
50 daughters. Wow.
We'll get back to that. And the list of battles, challenges, and city foundations just goes on, fighting various kings and villains across Greece and beyond, establishing cities like Tarentum, wrestling famed fighters, even challenging Dionysus to a drinking contest, which he lost, by the way.
He lost. To Dionysus. Makes sense, I guess.
Right. He fought giants like Antaeus, defeating him by lifting him off the ground, because Antaeus drew strength from his earth mother, Gaia. He was even the ancestor figure in Herodotus' account of the Scythians, testing his sons with his belt and bow to see who would rule.
The sheer volume and geographical spread of these adventures, often linked to local legends and founding myths, it just underscores how readily communities incorporated Heracles into their own histories.
Totally. He pops up everywhere.
His death, though, as recounted in plays like Sophocles' The Trachiniae, is a deeply tragic story, driven by misunderstanding and ultimately lingering vengeance.
It really is. After winning the hand of Deianira by wrestling the river god Achelous, they encountered the centaur Nessus while crossing a river.
And Nessus tried to assault Deianira.
True to his centaur nature, yes. Heracles shot him with an arrow tipped with the potent poison of the Lernaean Hydra's blood. But as Nessus lay dying, he enacted his revenge.
How?
He told Deianira that a mixture of his blood and semen would act as a potent love charm if she ever suspected Heracles of infidelity. A fatal deception.
Oh no. So years later, rumors reached Deianira that Heracles was infatuated with the young princess Iole, the one he abducted.
Exactly. Remembering Nessus's dying words, Deianira soaked a splendid shirt in the centaur's fatal mixture, genuinely believing it was a love potion to win back Heracles' affection. She sent it to Heracles via his herald leashes.
But instead of a love charm.
The Hydra poison in the blood activated upon contact with Heracles' skin, burning into his flesh, causing unimaginable agony. In his torment, not understanding the source of the pain, he threw the innocent herald leashes into the sea, where he was said to turn to stone.
Horrible. Just horrible.
To end his suffering, Heracles built his own funeral pyre on Mount Oida. The sources vary on who was brave enough to light the pyre. Maybe Poeas, father of the hero Philoctetes, or maybe his loyal companion Iolaus.
And whoever it was received Heracles' powerful bow and arrows as a reward.
That's the tradition. As his mortal body burned away in the flames, only his immortal essence, his divine heritage from Zeus, remained. And it was at this moment that Zeus granted his apotheosis, elevating Heracles to Olympus as a full god.
And those arrows, imbued with the Hydra's potent poison, they play one final role in myth, don't they?
They do. They were eventually used by Philoctetes during the Trojan War to kill Paris, whose death was supposedly the final requirement for Troy's fall. And the historian Herodotus, trying to place myth in time, estimated Heracles lived about 900 years before his own era, so roughly around 1300 BCE.
And so, after a life of just incredible trial, suffering, and immense achievement, he finally achieved that promised state of godhood.
He ascended to Olympus, where, remarkably, he was finally reconciled with his stepmother Hera, the source of so much of his suffering throughout his life.
Really? They reconciled?
Apparently so. And in a symbolic act of peace and integration into the divine family, he married Hera's own daughter, Hebe, the goddess of youth, as his fourth and final wife. They had two divine sons, Lexaeres and Anicetus.
Wow. Full circle in a way.
Yeah, even on Olympus, stories continued. The sources mentioned him transforming into a faun during the gods' battle with the monster Typhon. And later accounts, like Lucian's satire, humorously depict him arguing with other ascended heroes or gods over status and precedence.
Still causing trouble, maybe.
A little bit. And he even makes appearances in later myths as a deus ex machina, a divine intervention, notably appearing to Philoctetes, stranded on Lemnos, to convince him to finally join the Greeks at Troy, fulfilling the destiny tied to Heracles' own poisoned arrows.
Right, bringing his own story's threads together.
Exactly. And it's worth noting how his story was interpreted over time. The sources briefly touch on attempts within early Christian thought, like those reported by Eusebius or Clement, to view Heracles not just as a myth, but as maybe a historical figure whose deeds were later exaggerated and who was subsequently deified. This is called euhemerism.
Trying to rationalize him.
Essentially, yes. They even attempted to place him on a specific historical timeline, with Eusebius linking his reign in Argos and deification about 38 years later to a date around 1226 BCE, connecting it to Jerome's chronology for when Linus supposedly taught him music. It's a fascinating example of trying to historicize myth.
Definitely. Now let's delve into another layer of his complexity, which the sources explore in depth. His relationships. He had an incredibly varied and extensive history with both female and male lovers.
Yeah, it's quite something. We mentioned his 4 marriages. To Megara, tragically intertwined with his madness, to Omphale, the Lydian queen he served and married, to Deianira, whose misunderstanding led to his death, and finally to Hebe on Olympus.
But his affairs were legendary in their number, that famous story of him sleeping with all 50 daughters of King Thespius in one night.
Right, resulting in 50 sons, supposedly. It's often cited, sometimes almost jokingly, as a 13th labor. And many prominent royal lines across Greece and beyond proudly trace their ancestry to these sons.
His prolific fatherhood extended to encounters across different lands and peoples too, right?
Absolutely. Fathering sons with the Scythian snake woman who became ancestor of the Scythian kings, having sons with figures like Lavinia in Italy, even an unnamed Celtic woman whose son Gelides became the ancestor of the Gauls, according to some traditions. The sheer volume of his offspring is a recurring theme, cementing his role as a progenitor of nations and royal lines.
And the sources are clear that he had many male lovers as well.
They are. The biographer Plutarch is even quoted as saying they were beyond counting.
Wow. Any prominent examples?
Well, the most prominent and consistently linked is Iolaus, his nephew, charioteer, and loyal squire. So deep was their bond, sources say, that male couples and thieves would swear oaths of fidelity at Iolaus's tomb.
That's significant.
Very. Hylas, the young prince who sailed with him on the Argo before his disappearance, is another notable male lover whose story is often represented in art. There was also Elycaudas, honored in Sparta with a sanctuary and games, and Abderus, the eponymous hero of Abdera, who died tragically while Heracles was fighting the mares of Diomedes and was honored with games founded by Heracles.
Others are mentioned too.
Yes, figures like Admetus, his friend for whom he fought death. Iphitus, his friend whom he tragically killed in madness. Figures like Nereus, who's called the most beautiful man but might also have been his son. The sources list others honored locally for their relationship with him, like Sostratus.
And later literature added even more figures to this list.
It did, showing a continued interest in exploring this aspect of his character. It's really crucial to present this information factually, as reported in the sources, acknowledging the different traditions, to understand the full breadth of his relationships as depicted in antiquity. This extensive relationship history, both heterosexual and homosexual, is a vital part of his complex persona and contributes to his enduring fascination.
Absolutely. And as we've seen, the result of these countless relationships was a truly extensive lineage.
Yeah, emphasizing the sheer number of his children just underscores his foundational role in myth and history. The term Heraclidae refers generally to all his descendants, but particularly highlights the line of his son Hylas and their long legendary struggle to reclaim control of the Peloponnesus, which was a major historical myth for the Dorians.
Beyond the sons with Thespis' daughters, the tragic fate of the children by Megara is a dark chapter, though accounts differ on who survived, if any.
True. Other well-known children included Telephus by Oge, who became a king in Mysia, and Telepolemus by Astyoche, who famously led ships from Rhodes in the Trojan War.
And Herodotus specifically notes the line of 22 kings of Lydia, the Tylonids, traced their descent from Heracles and Omphale, linking him to a major historical Anatolian dynasty.
Exactly. And of course, on Olympus, his divine sons with Hebe, Alexiares, and Anicetus represent the continuation of his divine line. While the full list of consorts and children is vast and frankly confusing,
I bet.
acknowledging this extensive lineage just highlights his role as this powerful, almost primal progenitor figure in Greek consciousness.
Heracles wasn't confined to Greece, though. His reach and adaptation extended across the ancient world in remarkable ways.
It really did. In Rome, as Hercules, he was a distinct yet clearly related deity with his own cult practices and myths that differed in details from the Greek ones, but very much intertwined.
And in Egypt.
He was identified with various gods, including Shu, Khonsu, particularly at the site of Heraklion, which was named for him, and most notably, Hereshaph, whose cult center at Heracleopolis Magna became synonymous with Heracles.
His symbolism traveled even further east.
Yeah, through the interactions of Greco-Buddhist culture in places like Gantara, his imagery, the strength, the club was transmitted into the art and religious figures of the Far East. It influenced figures like Vajrapani, a protector deity sometimes shown holding a Vajra that resembles Heracles' club, and maybe even the Neo-Guardian figures found at the gates of Japanese temples.
That's incredible reach.
Isn't it? The historian Herodotus also linked him to the major Phoenician god Melkart, showing identification across prominent Near Eastern cultures. The Roman historian Sallust even records an African belief that Heracles died in Spain, and his multicultural army remained to populate the Mediterranean coast of Africa.
Temples and cult sites dedicated to him spread all along the Mediterranean coastline.
Absolutely. With cities like Monaco even deriving their name from one of his epithets, Heracles Monoikos, meaning the lone dweller.
And perhaps most famously, globally, the Strait of Gibraltar was known as the Pillars of Hercules.
Right, where he supposedly set up great spires or mountains, maybe just as a marker of the edge of the known world, but In some accounts, to stabilize the earth or ensure safe passage, it's an enduring symbol of his boundary-pushing influence.
Even today, his name persists, doesn't it? Variants like Heracles in modern Greek or Heracles in Georgian are still used as personal names.
Yep. And you see his enduring symbolism in sports with clubs like GS Heracles Thessaloniki using his name and image as a symbol of strength. And kind of surprisingly, the botanical genus Heracleum, which includes the giant hogweed, is named after him, likely due to the immense size of some of its species.
Huh. Giant hogweed. Okay, so what does this deep dive into Heracles really reveal? We've seen a figure born of divine and mortal parents whose life was a constant struggle against monsters, against fate, and even against his own impulses, leading to superhuman feats and just profound personal tragedy.
Yeah, he was a figure whose complex character encompassed incredible strength, yes, but also wit and deep passion, alongside moments of, frankly, coldness and divinely induced madness. He was worshipped as both hero and god. His cult deeply integrated into ancient life, reflecting his suffering just as much as his triumph.
We've explored his extensive and complex relationships with both women and men, resulting in a lineage that spawned countless myths and claims to royal descent. And his influence wasn't limited to Greece. His myths and symbolism spread right across the Mediterranean, into Egypt, the Near East, and even as far as the Far East.
He's far more than just a strong man. He's a figure who embodies fundamental human and, well, divine struggles. The burden of destiny, the impact of external forces, the complex nature of desire and duty, and that ultimate question of whether a mortal can truly transcend death to join the divine. His story endured for millennia because it wrestled with these really profound questions.
So considering the sheer volume of conflicting stories, his unique status straddling hero and god, and the incredible breadth of his adventures and relationships, what does the enduring, complex, and often contradictory figure of Heracles ultimately tell us about the values, the aspirations, and maybe even the anxieties of the cultures that kept telling and retelling his tales for thousands of years?
That's the question to ponder, isn't it?
Hmm.
What does he reflect about them and maybe even about us?